Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Karina Martinez. I'm your friendly representative with Corazon Latino, one of the partner organizations that the USDA selected to assist with the Farm and Food Workers Relief Grant Program. Thank you for joining us for the FFWR Bare Necessities, the third FFWR Grant Program webinar. As you join us, please feel free to introduce yourselves using the chat function located at the bottom of your screen. You can provide your name, your organization, your geographic location, and what eligible worker population you intend on targeting with the program you're designing for the FFWR grant program. Next slide, please. I would like to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you within a week or so. Please note that we are not taking live questions today, but if you use the Q&A box to ask questions, we will follow up with a response via your registration email. Next slide, please. As a quick overview, the Farm and Food Worker Program will provide grants to state agencies, tribal governments, and NGOs. $665 million is available to fund applications submitted to the USDA. The sum of the award will be from $5 million to $50 million. Once the funds are awarded, grant recipients will distribute $600 in relief funds to farm workers, meat packing workers, or grocery store workers to defray associated costs of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Today, we will be reviewing the bare necessities, what you'll need as a grant applicant to apply to the FFWR, how to write a competitive grant application, partnerships and collaborations, and staying informed on FFWR updates. Please note that there have been 2 other webinars that go over critical components of the FFWR grant application process that are available to you. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to introduce my colleagues from Corazon Latino and our fellow TA providers from the United Farm Workers Foundation, who were also selected by the USDA to assist with the FFWR grant program. You can reach us via the emails provided on the slides. Please note that for programs targeting farm workers, you should send your inquiries to the UFW Foundation. And if your program is targeting meat packing or grocery store workers, please email Corazon Latino's email. We will first introduce my colleague Felipe and then continue to the UFW Foundation representatives who are Miguel and Mike.
Thanks, Karina, and thank everybody for joining this exciting webinar. Well, we'll make it exciting. And also the program itself, it's exciting. That's what I meant. It's really an amazing opportunity to really bring this new program, this new approach to support those frontline workers during that suffered and that were key to keeping our country going during the initial part of the pandemic. So I'm really excited. Just wanted to share that, and also for the great partnership with UFW Foundation, and of course for USDA who brought us together. I'm gonna pass it to the UFW team. Miguel, Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Miguel Ceja, and I'm representing the UFW Foundation. With us today is Michael Browning, who's one of the contractors, who's also here to provide technical assistance.
Thank you. So next slide, please. Okay. So we're here to provide assistance with the grant application process, which takes an estimated 4 weeks to complete. You'll see some of the basic elements that you'll need to have in place in preparation for this program and how long it takes to register in these systems on average. Make sure that you have your TIN, your EIN number, a DUNS number, an active SAM registration, and an active grants.gov registration. You need to check on your status on each of these. Because remember that these are all administered by separate entities. The registration in these systems are free, so that's a bonus. And we provided more information in the second FFWR webinar, so please review that recording for additional notes that you might need. Next slide, please. The 2022 Request for Applications RFA PDF is your reference points for the forms that you will need to complete and submit via grants.gov. FFWR requires that all application packages include the SF-424, an application for federal assistance. You'll also need the project narrative form, and you'll need signed letters of commitment from each partner at the time of application. If applicable, you may also need a copy of your negotiated indirect cost agreement. Next slide, please. Updates. There are a few new updates that you should be aware of. First, the deadline to submit your application for the FFWR has been extended, and the application is now due on March 10th, 2022 by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Correspondingly, the grant period of performance was also adjusted. Make sure that your work plan dates align to the adjusted period of performance. The AMS has updated requirements regarding employment verification methods as well. Documentation such as a W-2 or pay stub will have to be submitted to demonstrate employment eligibility. Additionally, proof of identity will be required. Take time to review the FFWR RFA so that your application can reflect the most up-to-date requirements. Having said that, I will now hand this presentation over to Felipe, who will be going through some of the project narrative form.
Thank you very much, Karina. And trying to make sure that you can see my face. And so Karina mentioned earlier the importance of having the DUNS EIN and SAM.gov your registrations up to date and active. We can't stress enough that that's very important. I know that a lot of you have done this and it's not your first rodeo, but just make sure there's always nuances. There's always really changes in the system. There's always deadlines that change. Just make sure that it is the time is actually now. It's now, if not already late, because troubleshooting sometimes can be simple, but troubleshooting can also take weeks. And at least I can tell you from the Corazon Latino perspective, we've gone through a couple of those nightmare scenarios where even though we thought we were gonna had 4 weeks, still it took us 3.5 weeks to get it done, and we like barely made it. So just want to make sure, I couldn't stress more than make sure that everything's ready to go, do some testing, make sure that everything's active. Even if you change your address, whatever it is, make sure that those are things. And again, just friendly reminder. And as was mentioned, we covered a lot of those basic requirements and characteristics of this really exciting grant program, but we want to touch a little bit on what constitutes, at least from our experience, from the cumulative insights from UFW, from USDA, and many other folks that have been helping us co-create this way of interact and supporting. At the end of the day, we want the best, or I think the best, not we as a collective, as a group, we want to make sure that the best applications come in, and those who have the opportunity to serve and to bring these resources to its intended audiences, do it right. But also we want to make sure that we follow all of the requirements, protocols, and all that, everything that takes managing federal grants. And at the end of the day, it's our taxpayers' money in action. So we want to make sure that we do both well, make the best, but also that those funds are well managed. We're good stewards of those funds. So again, a lot of you have done this multiple times and have probably experts in this type, but it's always important to follow certain basic rules and certain tips that we want to share with you. And I think one of the most and most important is read thoroughly the RFA, the request for applications. To read every dot, everything, read it once, twice, 3 times, as many, make sure you read it and understand it. I think this is really the most important. Then the Q&A. This program, as it's new, there's a lot of changes and we're learning as we go, and there's adjustments that are being done as we go. So it's important to make sure that you have the latest and the most accurate information. Again, those documents, make sure that you know all the forms, especially the project narrative form, which is mandatory. You will have to submit your application, not only on time, not only through the channels that are outlined in the RFA, but also want to do in the format that it's, again, this in an effort to really give equal opportunity for evaluation and the most unbiased and really thorough evaluation of that. So we need to make there's consistency. Make sure that you are selecting which target audience or intended audience are you're applying for, you're targeting. If you are submitting as a grocery store worker application, you'd also have to submit a farm worker or meat packing worker application. Again, important elements, and we will make all this available. All of this information that we're sharing is available in those documents that I mentioned earlier. Another important thing, and just again, from our experience in just having this brainstorm and co-creation of this webinar and through the work that we've seen, is make sure that, again, you read everything, that you can understand, and most of the questions are being already addressed in the Q&A, and if not, feel free to submit. This is what we're here for. It takes a little bit of a process because we want to make sure that we're providing with the guidance of USDA the best responses to any questions. So make sure that you read them in advance, that you're sending it and you do it with time. Just on general grant writing experience, make sure that whoever writes the narrative of the team that writes the narrative, you also have somebody outside your internal group that hasn't read or hasn't been in the process to just reread it and review it. Make sure that it makes sense. Have them review the RFA and your actual application to make sure that it is that what you're proposing, it's what reflecting of your organization, reflecting on the priorities and the goals of the program, but also make sure that it's easy to read and to understand and evaluate. Again, we anticipate a large number of applications, and we want to make sure that those who are reviewing have all the elements and make it as clear as possible. Yes, I think that those are our initial thoughts that we have on that, and then you all have done it, and if not, this is it's important to really go thorough. There's word limits in some certain sections. There's requirements that we have in certain elements. There's the submission needs to be done, for example, through grant.gov, and it requires to be in PDF. Make sure that those PDFs are accessible, that you can open and that they're not password protected. Make sure that I would always recommend to, even though the deadline is at the specific date at midnight, make it a day before, because that day gives you 24 hours to troubleshoot anything. Slow internet, internet outages, computer freezing. It's always something, a story. We all heard those horror stories of last minute. So I will really encourage you to make sure, because the RFA states very clearly that we won't consider, or the program will not consider anything that not comes within the deadline. So make sure that you plan for the worst, hope for the best, because this is that type that hours and days worth of many hours of your time, hundreds of hours of your time can just may not be met for a simple technical glitch, and this is important. So we'll encourage you to really plan, really don't leave to the last minute, and make sure that you troubleshoot any potential. If you, the RFA contains in section 5.1 a criteria, we call it a score sheet, on how your proposals will be evaluated. Make sure that you familiarize with that section specifically, because literally reviewers are gonna be looking side by side. What's the criteria, and do you meet that criteria? How are you gonna meet that criteria? What added value, what unique value proposition you bring to this program, and how are you gonna meet at the end of the day the goals and the needs of this program. So use that as your guiding light. Make sure that you are, I will even recommend on a personal level, make sure that you mirror executive summary, whatever the criteria, mirror those, because that makes, again, easier for reviewers to really focus on what they need to be. And you will see in that section the grading and how reviewers will level it. But we cannot stress too much that this is really should be your guiding principle. And there's you will see also some word limits, some specific requirements, something when naming your PDF files. Make sure that you cover all of those, because again, sometimes those minor omissions or minor situations might complicate or disqualify you for the program. And what we're going to be walking through this in this next few slides, and also with Michael and Miguel, we're providing you that framework that it's reflected on section 5.1 of the RFA. And we want to make sure to give you at least some advice, some recommendations on how to make a compelling and strong case for your organization or for your coalition. First and most important, understand and align your proposals with the program's intent and priorities. And here's a brief example. The definition of field workers, livestock workers, meatpacking and grocery store workers, following obviously standards from the federal government and Department of Labor. So we make sure that the definition is clear. And this is just an example, that there's no room for interpretation, like, well, this person might be considered both. Now, make sure that it's really crystal clear and really aligns. At the end of the day, we know that all of those who are in this call have these frontline workers as constituents, as stakeholders that you're serving, and we commend you for that. But make sure that everything aligns and that you reflect that on your writing, because that's very important to make sure that those yeah, I think that's one of the most important. Executive summary, make sure that you again comply with the word, that it really provides an overview of your organization, and throughout the different sections of your proposal, make sure that alignment exists. Again, that's why having somebody external at the end review to make sure that everything matches, it's super helpful, at least something that we wanted to stress. In terms of technical merits, make sure that, again, they match what you're proposing with what reviewers are going to be looking into. So if you're identifying your specific networks, and I don't want to read all of this because you can find it in the RFA, but making sure that you're targeting one specific networks as specified or as defined in the RFA, that you have outreach strategies, that you identify challenges, how are you going to meet or try to overcome those challenges, the technical resources you and your partners are going to be utilizing to make sure that you comply and able to deliver what you have committed to do in the proposal. That you have a suitable, achievable, a well-conceived work plan, that you're also, for example, processes considering culturally responsive steps for low English proficiency, for challenges that we know that exist within our target audiences. So make sure that you're very clear, and again, make sure that they're concise, that you match what you're proposing, how the technical expert or the technical reviewers will be looking into. And again, most important, we know it's new. We know it's something that we're learning, but at the same time, make sure that what you said, that what you're proposing, it's achievable, and that you have a realistic time frame to do this. So yes, and I'm gonna pass it to Michael. Again, if you have any questions, comments, please add them in the chat box, and we will get back to you as soon as we're able to get those responses. So Michael from UFW Foundation.
Thank you, Felipe. I want to underscore what Felipe said before I get into my introduction about the scoring sheet. You know, as a grant writer, That's probably the second section that I read twice, because if you know anything about the education field, they talk about teaching to the test. And that's essentially what the federal government has provided to you as teaching to the test. This is what they want, and this is what they want you to respond to. And as technical assistance providers, our goal is to teach to the test. So if the federal government is going to review your proposal based upon criteria, we want to provide the technical assistance that matches what the reviewers will be looking for. So I agree with Felipe 1,000% that that is a very crucial piece of this RFA, is going through that score sheet and making sure that you have responded to each one of those criterion that's listed there. What I typically tell folks that I'm working with on federal grants is to make it a checkbox. And instead of having the numbers, just cut and paste that into a checkoff list. And once you've completed one section of those score sheet items, check it off so that you know that you've got all of them. So that's my little soapbox thing. But my name is Mike Browning, and I probably worked on every aspect of federal government granting other than being a federal employee. I have written federal grants. I have managed federal grants and worked as a staff person on federal grants. I have been a reviewer on federal grants. I have advocated on behalf of getting a federal grant program instituted, and it's still in existence since 2000, and quite excited about that. And provided training and technical assistance to federal contract grantees. And so I'm pretty up to speed on how the application process works and really what reviewers are looking for. And so teaching to the score sheet is very important, but also in your first line of review before you submit anything up into grants.gov is that you want to make sure that you followed all of the instructions. That's key. And that if they're saying, the font size, word limitation, page limitation, anything, PDF, all of those things, because what happens is that once the federal government receives those, there's a first line of review to ensure that you submitted everything according to what they ask for. USDA might be nice and say, well, we'll forgive them if they didn't do the right font size or if they didn't do this. Other federal agencies do not. And so the expectation is that you follow every instruction, because even before the reviewers see your proposal, they need to make sure that you followed all the instructions to submit your proposal. So please look carefully at all the instructions about font size, about PDFing forms, about page limitations, using the right work plan format, all of those things, because if you don't, your proposal is less likely to even make it to the actual reviewers to even score it. So make sure that you follow all of those logistical issues before submitting your proposal into grants.gov. Okay, on to some of the budget issues. The budget section is very important because what the reviewers and the feds are going to be looking for is, does your proposal, what you've written in your narrative and work plan and objectives and outcomes, match what your budget is explaining that you will do? So the first important piece is that form SF-424. And so that's standard for federal grants. And so if you've written federal grants, you're very familiar with it, but it's one that's essential. And so you want to make sure that your estimated funding or your funding that you're requesting from the feds matches what's in your actual budget that you're going to submit. So this is a separate document and a form, plus your budget forms. So you want to make sure that your SF-424 matches what you are explaining in your actual budget. And then there's also some information on there about federal delinquency and those types of things. And you want to make sure, as far as budget is concerned, that those boxes are checked and appropriate. And there's plenty of other information on the SF-424, but you need to research all those other fields in that form to make sure that they're all complete. Again, if you do not complete this form correctly, or there's some pieces missing, that's grounds for not even taking your proposal to the next step. So don't let any small thing like that jeopardize your potential for being funded. make sure that you again go through that form and that everything is matching what's in your proposal. So in regards to that score sheet, when you talk about the actual budget, there's the financial controls 30 points, which is very important to this particular grant. And so you want to make sure that you read all 3 of those areas, and they give a little more detail in the RFA on these areas, on what you should be presenting. But you want to make sure that the application represents a substantial, effective, sound fiscal management. You know, there was a saying that, you know, grant funders and foundations, you know, they want to fund something that is going to be likely to be successful. And so you may have a great organization and done some wonderful work, but what you need to do in this proposal is demonstrate that you can manage effectively this particular grant program. Okay, so anything that you feel that helps them, the reviewers, understand that you have the sound fiscal management system and infrastructure in place to manage this, or will have based upon the funding that you receive, that's your job, is to convince the reviewers that you will have those controls in place. And there's, you know, support within the budget to upgrade your systems or whatever that might be, as far as whatever your infrastructure is to manage those controls. But you're going to have to demonstrate that you can utilize these funds effectively. Also, that you have a audit history. And, you know, again, for the organizations that, large organizations, I'm sure that you have annual audits. And so you just want to make sure that your audit control, your audit system is effective, and that there's, you know, no bad marks on your audit, and that when the feds ask for that information, that again, it demonstrates that you can manage funds effectively. And particularly if you've managed government funds, that would be great. Plans for coordination, communication, and data sharing, all of those things are important. And many of those things take money. If it's from the staff person that you're going to have on your agency that's doing that, if it's your internal person, or if it's a consultant that's doing those things, you need to demonstrate that you have the full capacity and the full infrastructure to manage the funds. And it's okay to say, well, we're going to need to hire an external bookkeeper. Fine. If that was what you need to do to manage this grant, make sure you justify that within your budget justification. Again, you want to convey to the reviewers that you can manage these funds. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the RFA, there's also some information about in the budget narrative form. So we're going back and forth between the budget narrative form and also the RFA. And so this is on the actual budget narrative form. So it's important that you understand what it is that the outcomes of the actual grant, because what the reviewers are going to be looking for is the feasibility of your plan to reach these outcomes, to implement outreach activities, to get to the folks that need to get the payments. Okay, do you have a feasible plan and associated budget with that plan to reach those populations? And in many cases, these are hard to reach populations, underserved populations that take unique outreach strategies and support to reach them. And so what you need to do is come up with a feasible plan in these outcomes, and then match it to your budget on how you're going to reach them. If it's through subcontracting, sub-awards, you need to come up with a plan that's feasible. And again, that your agency as the lead agency, as the grant agency, can manage. Number 2, to distribute the funds, payments to the eligible beneficiaries. And so some of you, later on, you're going to hear more about partnerships. And it's not that, you know, your agency, if you're the lead agency and the grantee, has that experience. But if you have other subcontractors, partners that has the capability to get the funds to the eligible beneficiaries, you need to make that strong case, because I guarantee you there are some agencies who have that experience. And so, you know, as a grant program, they're going to be awarding these grants according to scores and according to the priority areas. So you want to make sure that you demonstrate the strongest case possible on how you can get these payments directly to the beneficiaries. And whatever form that you're choosing to get the funds to them, if it's check, if it's through cards, you know, that's up to you. But you need to come up with a system that's soundproof, that you can actually and demonstrate that you can actually get these payments into their hands, not to the hands of their employers, not to the hands of some supervisor, but directly into their hands. If it goes through several layers of people to get to that beneficiary, fine, but you need to demonstrate that that's an effective model and that it can work, and that your budget reflects how you plan to do that and where the resources are going to be utilized to make that happen. And so that's the key thing about the outcomes and about your plan that you're putting together, your work plan and your narrative. It needs to match what you're saying in your budget. Now, if there's some things in your work plan that you say that you're going to do, and then the reviewer says, well, where's the funding to hire the consultant to do this? You said you're going to have a consultant, but there's no funding in there to support a consultant. Those are things that reviewers look for. So you want to make sure that if you come up with a plan to reach the beneficiaries and to outreach to them, that you have budgeted items in your budget on how you plan to do that. Next slide, please. Okay, some of the cost pieces, and this is really important. You want to make sure that they're reasonable, of course, allowable and necessary. So you want to look through all of the budget instructions to determine what's allowable under this grant. You know, you're not going to go out and buy a building. You're not going to go out and contract for somebody to do some work in the fields. You're not going to help folks, you know, get their visas or their papers to work. So you want to make sure that you look at what is allowable in the costs and that you only bill the government for those costs. Now, if you plan to do some cost sharing on your own, that's on you, and that's fine. But the federal government is only going to be looking at what you're asking from the federal dollars. And again, is it feasible to get your scope of work completed? And you also want to take a look at, you know, the agricultural marketing services expectation of the 80% of the funds will be used for the beneficiary payments. You know, again, what the Congress is looking for and the executive branch of our government is looking for, does this program work? And do the folks who actually need the help get the money? This program is not to beef up any nonprofit, to put monies in their coffers or anything like that, or to boost up farming agencies or anything like that. The goal specifically is to help those folks who had issues during the pandemic, which is why they're asking for or expect that 80% of those funds go directly to those beneficiaries. And so, you know, you can take your best shot. You know, this is an expectation. It certainly doesn't say that it's mandatory, but when something's expected, you know, and you're writing a grant, you don't tend to write towards, like I said, the test. And the test is the expectation that there's 80% of the funds going directly to the people who need the funds. So please consider that carefully when developing your budget, so that, again, this doesn't stand out as a red flag when it comes in at 60%, 50%, and you're less likely to get, you know, positive remarks from your reviewers. Direct payment should be captured in the other category on your budget. And on our next slide, we're going to be, well, 2 slides from now, we're going to be talking about that. But you want to make sure that the $600 payments to the beneficiaries in any 3 of the categories is in the other line item category. So don't make up another category on this budget form or anything like that. Under other is where you would demonstrate that 80% of the $600 beneficiary payments. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in regards to the indirect costs, some of you have negotiated indirect costs with the federal government. It's not something that you can start today and be prepared to apply for during this grant period. It takes a while to get that negotiated rate solved and established with your award letter. So if you don't have a negotiated rate, indirect rate with the federal government, that's fine. You cannot apply today and expect that you're going to have it by the time that you submit your grant. So those of you who do not have that negotiated indirect cost rate, with the government, they are allowing through USDA 10% indirect rate. So on top of your modified total direct cost, you can ask for that 10% that is for your internal work to make sure the grant is carried out. That's not a part of your direct service cost. And you can look at the RFA section 461 for more information about that. But more importantly, the modified total direct cost. Okay, so in your budget, you're going to notice that there's line items for specific things, and that's fine. But in calculating your indirect cost, you can only calculate that based upon the modified total direct cost. And so there's some things that are allowable in that rate and some things are not. And so you can see that on RFA section 461, and they include, of course, direct salaries, wages, applicable fringe benefits, materials and supplies, services, travel, and up to 25,000 of each sub-award, regardless of the period of performance. So you want to make sure that you're real keen on looking at the information, because you may have some sub-awardees with much larger contracts, but only up to the first 25,000 of each contract can be a part of your modified total direct cost. And it excludes equipment, capital expenditures, and charges for patient care, rental costs, tuition remission, scholarships and fellowships, participant support costs, and a portion of the award that exceeds 25,000. And this becomes really important because, again, if 80% of your budget is for support to the recipients and participants, then that excludes that from your modified total direct cost. And if we can go to the next slide, and I can explain it a little bit better. Okay, so on the budget narrative form, the project narrative form, in the budget section, you will see a graph or a schematic similar to this, but I've highlighted certain things in color and added a few things so that I can help you understand about how the indirect rate is calculated. So you have the categories: personnel, fringe benefits, travel, etc. And if you look on the federal fund side, I've indicated which of those could qualify for that modified direct cost. So of course, personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, that's a no. So that's one thing that you wouldn't use for your calculation. Supplies for the program, yes. Okay, subcontracting, again, up to only $25,000 per contract. If you have 15 contracts, each of those based upon the $25,000 threshold only. And then under other, you'll see where the payments are, the $600 payments to beneficiaries, 80% potentially on your budget. Those are not part of that modified rate. So you cannot use that to calculate what your indirect rate will be on this particular budget. And then, so for your total direct cost, it's everything. So everything from the personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, the other, including the payments and other things that you add under others that you'll specify in your budget. That's all your direct costs. However, when calculating your indirect rate on top of that, you can only look at your rate, which is again, either the 10% if you don't have a negotiated rate with the feds, or whatever your percentage is that you've already negotiated and you have proof that you have that rate with the federal government. And then you would multiply that times the cost that are only the modified cost of your proposal. So that means that your total budget would be your total direct, so everything, excuse me, from personnel down to other, all direct costs, plus your indirect rate, which again is based upon your rate times only the modified portions of your budget that you see highlighted in red. Okay, so the key thing here is that if there's an expectation that that the payments to the beneficiaries are a part of that indirect rate, they're not. And that's something that's spelled out in the federal documents. And so we've listed those documents for you to review as well, to ensure that, again, that you're calculating your indirect rate based upon only the costs that are approved by the federal government and the USDA for this particular program. And again, your total budget would be total direct, everything that you're going to be billing for, plus that indirect rate, which you have calculated by multiplying your indirect rate from the feds negotiated, or 10%, times your modified negotiated rate. So that wraps up this portion. And again, my parting remarks on this is to review all of the information that we've shared in this PowerPoint and other PowerPoints, and write to the test, which is, again, the scoring sheet. I'm going to turn it over to Miguel.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon again to everyone that's joining us today. Like Michael stressed, a key part of this program is building a successful program, but also implementing it so that you're able to distribute those funds out into the hands of these worker populations. And so one of the important aspects of this grant is building partnerships and collaboration with organizations that may be able to do that or already have those connections on the ground. It is important to keep in mind that when you are the lead applicant or the lead organization, you still probably have a lot of those financial controls in place that are required, and you will have oversight of the program you're running, but it is still important to look for those organizations that can be on the ground and touch bases with the worker populations. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we've put together, myself and Alexis, who's one of our TA providers with Farm Worker Justice. She and myself put together a couple of tips that would help an organization know what to seek out, essentially, in a partnering organization. So you definitely want to look to make sure that your organizational values align, and that has to do with the harmony of the program that you're running, to ensure that whoever you are subcontracting or getting into a sub agreement with, that you do have the same vision for the program. You also want to ensure that you are looking for organizations that are already doing the work on the ground with hard to reach populations, that have an understanding of the cultural and linguistic diversity of the population, and have previous experience. As we saw last year, a lot of grassroots organizations pulled together to provide support on the ground. And for those organizations that were on the ground, you've probably noted that there is still hesitance from a lot of populations to accessing some of these resources. So in order to implement a successful program, you want a trusted organization that individuals on the ground feel comfortable sharing information with, and being able to access those funds. If we can move on to the next slide. And then we did want to cover just an overview of any partnership agreements and things to keep in mind when you are creating those MOUs or partnership agreements. So ensuring that you're outlining your mission for the program, ensuring that you're clearly stating the dates of service or the performance period, describing the roles of both organizations, so clearly stating any time commitments, level of authority, who is taking the lead, who is being subcontracted or under the subaward, and any responsibilities, activities, and expectations. So you want to be very clear when developing any type of partnership agreement. Once it is developed, if we can go to the next slide. Once it is developed, you should have a sense of ownership. Both organizations should have a sense of ownership over the document to ensure that everyone's looked it over and has agreed to the items that have been listed. And then that both organizations have felt that they've provided input towards creating that MOU document. And then lastly, making sure that you revisit that document as the program moves forward to ensure that everything is aligning, and if there's any changes need be, then making those as the program moves. If we go into the next piece. So to help facilitate some of those partnerships, what we're doing is we have created a brief form, a Google form. The link is available on our TA websites. So for those organizations that are interested applicants, we strongly encourage you to fill out the form so that we are able to essentially provide a spreadsheet for organizations that may still be looking for partners to collaborate with in this program. So for those organizations that are able to provide their consent at the last portion of the form, we'll be publishing the forms also on our TA websites in order for other organizations to essentially self-serve and view the spreadsheet and see what organizations are still looking for a partner or would like to form partnerships. For those organizations that do not consent to share their information, you are still able to use that spreadsheet. We just won't be publishing your information if you don't fulfill that consent piece. So thank you so much. And I'm going to be turning it over to Karina to help us round out this presentation.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Felipe, so much for all of the information that you've shared today. We've covered a lot of ground. Should you need further guidance or technical assistance or support as you prepare your applications, you can reach a representative from the United Farm Workers Foundation or Corazon Latino for one-on-one meetings. To schedule a meeting, visit the Calendly link shown here, and you'll be guided towards the right representative based on the eligible population that you are targeting. So please make sure to review the RFA, very important. We've underscored that a few times today to check, and also you can check previous webinars and check the FAQs prior to scheduling a one-on-one meeting. And I'm going to go over a little bit more about the FAQs in our next slide. Okay, so FAQs are going to be incredibly useful. As USDA received questions regarding the FFWR program, additional FAQs are added to the webpage, so please check the site periodically. The newest FAQs are found towards the bottom of each section. Before we leave, I want to give you an example of some of the FAQs that we get and also tell you how to stay updated. So as an example, we have question 4. Do workers seeking a relief payment have to assert and or provide documentation regarding citizenship status? That's the question. The answer, and this is a new answer that we've provided. Immigration status is not one of the eligibility criteria under the program. While assertions and or documentation regarding citizenship status are not required, workers must provide proof of identity and proof of employment. So please see section 3.2 of the RFA for more in-depth information. That's one of the new questions. Another one is question 11. Is there additional guidance available regarding how applicants can design a program that ensures that beneficiaries receive only one relief payment? The answer is yes. USDA AMS will provide grant recipients with compliance resources and technology to support program integrity. Grant recipients should have sufficient financial controls and payment processes in place to issue one relief payment to a single eligible worker. So as you see, these will be critical to getting the most up-to-date information as you proceed through the application process. Next slide, please. All right, so you can continue to get the latest information by signing up to our newsletter focused on the FFWR program. In the previous edition of our newsletter, we introduced the USDA FFWR interested applicant form, which you saw today. We announced this webinar and we provided information about how to get the TA one-on-one meetings, among many other updates. The newsletter can be an important resource for you. So if you haven't signed up yet, please email me at Karina, Karina at corazonlatino.us to get added to this email list. And next slide, please. That concludes this webinar. This webinar will be made available to you online within a week or so. You can check for them online, other webinars. or wait for it in the newsletter. To look it up online, you can go to www.ams.usda.gov/services/grants/FFWR. But we'll send it to you in the newsletter as well. So I'd like to thank all of you who've participated, and I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Karina, before we close, I'm so sorry. I'm holding people just a few more minutes. Michael gave such a fantastic overview of indirect cost and how you should kind of calculate that. I just wanted to put one quick clarifier on that. So if you have a NICRA, a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, use that. Follow whatever is in your NICRA in terms of determining, how to charge indirect costs to this grant. You may do less than your agreement if you so choose to try to abide to that 80-20 rule that Michael spoke about earlier in the presentation. If you do not have a NICRA, then you are able to do the de minimis rate. And that is when the MTDC comes into play. A lot of times folks go, I don't have a NICRA. I'll just charge 10% of my total budget. Those are my indirect cost rate that I can charge. And that's not true, because the modified total direct cost has very specific eligible expenses, which Michael went through thoroughly. So I just wanted to make sure that we had that really lined out in black and white. Michael, was there anything I missed in that clarification that you wanted?
Not at all. That was perfect.
Awesome.
All right, well, thank you all, and we'll be in contact in our next newsletter update, or if you need to schedule a one-on-one as well. Have a good evening.